Greetings, everyone. This is Scott Montgomery of the Small Town Mercer. Happy St. Patrick's Day today. This is when I'm making this video, so today's a kind of a green day, isn't it? All right, then. So today I'm going to talk about the philosophy of Bitcoin. And I think it's important because my wife left her device in here. Great. Anyway, so I think it's important because we're going to been reading a lot about the upcoming tax increase that the Biden administration wants to announce, or maybe they've already announced it. I don't know. But the reason I want to get into this is because um, we've had a stimulus last year. This is 2021, by the way. So in 2020, we had a stimulus. We had another stimulus. We had one in the spring. We had another one at the end of winter, I think, or no, at the beginning of winter, right? Before Trump left office. Now we have another one at the end of winter. So now we're going to have tax increase. We're going to go back to where taxes were. And I was thinking the other day, when I made my video the other day about taxation and about the fact that we collect about 5.5 billion in taxes. I think we collect actually a little less than that. But we spend about 6.5 trillion in revenues. But remember, that 5.5 billion in taxes that we collected last year is actually paying for 2005's debt. So just keep that in mind. So now we're going to raise taxes. Pay off what? To pay off the debt from 2007, probably. Okay? So in the long run, is that really going to spur employment? And the answer is no, it's not. And so I wanted to go over the philosophy of Bitcoin because I think this is the best way to explain how economics should work and how it shouldn't work. So to go into Bitcoin, got to remember that was developed during the 2007, 2008, or no, I'm sorry, the 2008, 2009 financial crisis. And the government's response was Bush passed a huge stimulus package to bail out banks and people that did all the lending, and then hopefully that would trickle down to society. And then President Obama did the same thing, and he bailed out some of the automakers and some of the people that were in trouble. And this is the philosophy they have of how economics works. And little do we know, or little do they know, that eventually, as prices rise and as things become more expensive, it's going to be harder and harder and harder for people who do not have massive amounts of money, which is who? Most people, to pay their bills in the future. It's very, very hard. And so a lot of people now, I think more people now than probably that did 20 years ago are now living off credit, or to some degree living off some credit. All right? And I want to go back to the philosophy because Bitcoin is created at this time as a response to that. And what I mean by that is irresponsible economic behavior. And irresponsible economic behavior starts out with the fact that a central bank, central planning, is in control of the money, thinking that that's going to somehow prevent economic panics and economic recessions and economic depressions. When in fact, it eventually leads to a more massive recession or depression. So let's get into that. So Bitcoin is created in 2008. and it was released in 2009, I believe. Okay, it's going on along the same time as this crisis, because listen, people are fed up, and they have the technology. Let's develop something that isn't tied to a physical asset like gold, because it's not possible. And I think they realize it's just not possible to use gold and silver as money anymore. I guess it would be if the whole system crashed, but I hope that we don't get to the whole system crashing and being plunged into another dark ages. So anyway, so let's get into this. So if you want to understand the philosophy of Bitcoin, you have to understand that it follows the Austrian School of Economics. All right. And what is the Austrian School of Economics? Well, I'm going to go through a kind of a thumbnail history. You know, it's not a complete history. For the complete history, you should do your own research. I would love to make a video on the complete history of this someday, but it would be a 3-hour video. I don't know who would watch that. Maybe somebody would. But I'm going to try to do it in 10 minutes. Wish me luck. It's going to be hard. Okay, so I want to go back to Great Britain during the Revolutionary War. Okay? And in Great Britain, you have two schools of thought. And you've got classical economics, which is Adam Smith, right? And eventually David Ricardo. And they're going to come up with how economics should work. They do not like the mercantilistic system. All right? So that England has been engaging in. And the mercantilistic system means that the government is responsible for collecting the wealth, and it distributes it, it trickles it down to the people in the form of jobs and employment and what have you. But all along and it's basically a derivative of what the king and kingdoms have done forever, right? You have a king, the king has his military, he quote unquote protects you and takes care of you, and you live on the king's plantation, in other words, which is the country you live in. All right? And so in doing so, he or whoever, the queen, he or she, king or queen or both, they collect taxes, they invest in the military, they invest in conquest, they invest in going out and establishing colonies, and those colonies produce raw goods. All right? And so America happened to be, the United States here happened to be one of England's colonies. All right? So now our colony realizes that we're in business to make England rich. And we're starting to get into this philosophy of Smith and Ricardo now, which is what? They're trying to break away from that. They're trying to say, look, nations should compete with one another for goods and services, not hoard them and fight each other, and the winner gets the spoils. What happens to everybody else who loses? So he sees Europe is in this never-ending spiral. Right now the French and the Dutch are taking it on the chin from the English, and the German states are kind of allied with England. And they're not really a nation yet. The Italian states are also suffering because England is being a dominant factor. You've still got the Islamic Empire going on, the Ottoman Empire, and they're a factor as well. And so you have constant warfare with all these nations. And these people are trying to come up with a system in which everybody can compete and get along. So Smith and Ricardo come up with classical economics. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to say, look, trade with your resources. America should be independent. or other countries should be independent. We shouldn't be colonizing them and treating them as second-class citizens or slaves or whatever. We should be trading with them. We should be developing industry. We should compete with other nations. So you take your raw material, you trade for your raw materials, and your industry and your product are your value, not just the gold, not just the money. So the industry makes a product, and the public determines what is valuable, and that's what people will make. And so then you have to balance cost versus your profit margin. So when you do that by the equipment you invest in and the employment you hire. All right, and employees and managers or business owners negotiate with each other, and you negotiate prices with other countries. And then Ricardo comes along and says, "Look, what you develop best, that's what you should specialize in and sell. Other countries can do that too." So they're trying to come up with some kind of a system so that war is not waged. And then you have Jeremy Bentham on this side. And he's going to come up with, well, the state should use its influence in social aspects. So should make sure that everybody's profitable, sort of like a welfare type system. So that kind of notion where the state should be more in control of the wealth, but should distribute it more, as opposed to trying to get more. So he also kind of agrees with this to some degree, but not entirely. So here you've got Smith and Ricardo trying to make the nation wealthy by making the citizens wealthy. And here you've got Bentham saying, well, the state should get their share and distribute that out to those who can't do well in the classical system. And that's kind of where we are. We've been in that world since the 1700s. That's the age-old argument today. Okay? So you've got classical versus social economics. And then an interesting thing happens. So Britain is, like I said, they're taking the Dutch, they're beating them, and they're beating the French, they're beating the Spanish, they're beating off the Islamic Empire. They're fighting against the Americans, so they have to wrap that up and move on to the European continent, right? And so this is what they're doing. They also are trying to hold on to colonies in India and other places that are in uprising. And so in doing so, they run up a big deficit. And they no longer have taxes from America anymore. They do have trade with America. They were quickly able to do that. And so what's going to happen is that they're going to start printing money. And so they're going to do this social thing where they print money. All right. Going to take Bentham's advice. Bentham is the founder of the University of London, I believe, or at least he's credited with being the founder of the University of London. So anyway, so now we're starting to move away from strictly classical economics to more of a social economics, okay? So that's what's going to happen. Eventually, there's going to come a guy who's in the banking industry and realizes that, remember banks, England used to be a central bank until we get to this point, and now you're starting to see more local banks. And so the Bank of England is going to start loaning money and covering the debts. So essentially what they're going to do is you have a bank who loans money out to a business, and the business is starting to collect money. They're starting to make a profit. And so they start paying back their loan. Well, they don't completely pay off the loan. They're just paying off a portion of it. And so what the bank would do, the local bank would do, is they would go to the Bank of London and say, I need more money to loan out. Have you paid back your loan? No, but see, these guys are paying. Here's my accounts. They haven't paid them off, but they are paying. Oh, okay. So the Bank of London says, all right, here's your money, because that's good enough for me. So that's basically the start of fractional banking. So then we print more money. We print more money. Now it's worth less gold or less bullion than it was before. So now you have this guy come along named Henry Thornton. And he was a banker. He's going to eventually work, I think, for the Bank of London. And then he's going to get elected to um, the House of Commons. And he's going to do an interesting thing. He's going to make somewhat of a study. It's not a real empirical study, but it's a study. And he's going to realize something. He's going to realize that he doesn't call it fractional reserve banking. What he calls it is the duplication of paper and lending on the promise of payment instead of lending on actual payment. In other words, not waiting for the loans to be paid back in full before you loan again. In other words, you should be keeping this money on your balance sheet and not borrowing it from the Bank of London. And as a result, it becomes inflationary. And prices rise, making wages lag. So in other words, the higher wages you get, still not really paying for more. So this thought that, okay, the people are now going to get more money, and they're going to generate more spending, and that's going to grow the economy. Well, it's going to grow the economy, but it's not going to grow the wealth of the economy. So growing the economy means that you're making money, but you're not making enough money to get ahead. And that's what he discovered. So he's going to propose that stop and that we go on bullion, right? So this is going to start what I call the new foundations of economics, this report. He doesn't do an empirical study. And so what people start to realize is that I wonder if we can find out when this tipping point happens. When does this happen? And what do I mean by this? When does this happen? When do prices rise and wages start to fall behind prices? When does that happen? And so you start to get into this Malthusian exercise, because Malthus was around at this point too, and he's starting to say that resources are scarce, and when you have more people and more of something, then that item tends to be scarce, and so then you get the Malthusian thought process that people have today about there's too many people, there's too many of this, there's too many of that, and it's not sustainable. So we get into this sustainable argument now. That's not sustainable. We're going to run out of that resource. It's never coming back, and we're all going to die. All right? So that's kind of where that thinking goes. But more importantly, we want to find out when this comes out of balance. When does the price rising, the inflation, overcome the earned income, right? So we don't have that. But now economics is going to move from this social aspect into how things should be done to create a balance, like negotiating wages or trade or things of that nature should all be negotiated. We're going to move from that to actually studying the science of when this happens, what do we do about it? Okay, so now we're going to get into that. All right, so this starts with Henry Thornton in 1802. All right, so now we're going to move into this area here. And as we move into the 1800s, You're going to have, I'm going to fast forward. There's other economists before these guys. Remember, I have to still talk about things. I'm going to skip over things like um, 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 uh, oh, God. Oh, it's hell when you're old. Your brain farts. Um, I'm going to skip over the economies of the 1800s. Okay, the de Tocqueville and Jackson and all that stuff. So I'm just going to skip over that. I just want to cut to the chase here. So I'm going to move forward all the way to three economists, and these three economists are um, Bevins, right? Oh, I wrote them down here. I want to get their names so I don't forget. Okay. I've studied these guys so much. I want to get their names right though, because I always refer to them by their last names. We're going to get to William Jevons, Stanley Jevons, and Leon Walras. Oh, Walras, and Carl Menger. And they're going to put science to this utility, to this Jeremy Bentham. They're going to put numbers to the Henry Thornton treatise of when does this happen. And if you can find out when this happens, then you can alert people and do something different, Jevons is going to come up with this notion of utility. And basically that you're going to start to see that he's going to take the notion that the more you use a good, the less pleasure you get out of it, that type of thing. And so you're going to see that less demand, and this, the science of this is going to come later, but he's going to find out that less demand for a product is going to make it less valuable, and more demand for something else is going to make it more valuable. And so if enough goods are in less demand, then you're going to start to have an economic downturn. And so less people are going to be hired, and you're either going to want to reduce your wages to keep your job or just reduce people, that type of thing. Okay. Walras is going to come up with a theory that when portions of an economy are lagging, sectors of an economy are lagging, then you're probably going to start to have a recession, and you should start saving money and prepare for that and put it away. And then when it's over, then you could start spending and investing again, that type of thing. Okay? So now back then, these, and Jevons is going to come up with something similar, and then we'll talk about Menger in a minute. But this type of thinking is going to work well for the 19th century. In the 19th century, you don't have a lot of sectors. Okay, you have a government sector, you have an industrial sector, and natural resources, that type of sector is not as big. We're not really using oil that much until later in the 19th century. You're using some, but mostly as a lubricant. But you've also used, whale oil and other things as well. And so most of it's in the manufacturing sector, though. You've got steam as well. But all of this is kind of tied together in the manufacturing sector. And so all the supplemental parts of that, textiles and all that is all manufacturing. So that's pretty much how the world is running. And then you have an agricultural sector. So today you have a tech sector, you have services, medical research, and things that you didn't have back then. Back then, medical research was limited. Other things were limited. I think the people who cut your hair were also your dentist, right? Anyway, so you had more of a limited economy. So when certain portions of that economy faltered, yeah, it was a surefire sign that other things were going to falter. Today, we just have too much of all these sectors are still there, plus many others. So, it's a smaller percentage now of the economy than it was back then. So, anyway, and then you have Carl Menger doing the same thing, except Carl Menger is going to put more of a science to it. And he's going to say that economic policy is going to be responsible for the economy not doing well. In other words, if the government is spending too much, let's say on military or other services or welfare services, and they start printing money, then that's going to take away from the tax revenues they're going to acquire from here. So Menger is the guy he's from Austria, and he's going to start this Austrian school, right? All right. Walras is from France. Jevons is from England. And there's a real problem with Jevons and Walras and why the Austrian school flourished. Jevons dies. He dies in his 40s. And with him goes the classical school, pretty much. I mean, you still have other people in that school, but they're not as prominent because you have more people in the Jeremy Bentham School. Most of your economists, University of London or London School of Economics, right? London School of Economics, all those people that come out of that are in the Bentham School, where the government has to support some of this stuff. Okay, Jevons and some of these other classical economists, Stuart Mill, those people are in the other school, but they're considered out of date now. So Menger is going to say no, their policies are what lead to some of these issues in this becoming out of balance, not just utility falling out of favor, not just portions of the economy. He agrees with these two, but he also will go on. He doesn't quite say this yet, but he will. He goes on to say that no, it's economic policy plus these things are going to lead to that. And so you have to get your economic policy in order before you do anything else. Okay? So then, fast forward to the 20th century, and we go from Jevons and Menger to people like, I'm not going to pull out everybody, I just picked out a couple. Okay? You got people that we know of, right? I think that are famous today. You have von Mises. And you have, I'm not going to talk about Murray Rothbard, but I am going to talk about Friedrich Hayek. I think I'm going to talk about Hayek. Okay? And then over in this corner, eventually you're going to have John Maynard Keynes and the Keynesian economics, okay, which is going to say that government is responsible for taking care of all this, putting more money into the economy, using more credit. And then eventually when that comes about and everybody's doing well, then you raise taxes, right? And that pays for it all. And you raise taxes on these higher income people, that's going to take care of everything, right? Then you have von Mises and Hayek saying, no, no, you need to practice sound money. And what is sound money? Sound money, and I'm just going to simplify it. Sound money means that money has to have value. And when money has perceived value, then it is worth a lot. And if it has perceived value, you should have earned money, and I'm going to call it earned money, as opposed to borrowed. All right? And that's my term. This is the Scott Montgomery economics lesson of the day. Earned money and not borrowed money. Earned money means that before you borrow money, you have to have more assets in your account so that you essentially are your own bank, right? So if I want to borrow $100,000 to either purchase more valuable goods or to pay bills or to do whatever, maybe purchase a bigger asset like a house that's got value, or let's say gold, or let's say fast forward to today, let's say I want to borrow money to purchase more Bitcoin. All right? That's what you do. And then you pay your bills from the rest of that. So you borrow money from your assets. So maybe only a portion of your assets are put up for collateral. You don't sell them. You spend part of that money on whatever you want to buy and the rest of the money to pay off what you bought so that you can replenish the collateral and free it up so that it's still usable in the future. As opposed to borrowing more money than you have. I have $5,000. Great. You can buy a $25,000 car and a $300,000 house, and we'll throw in about $10,000 worth of new clothes. There you go. All right. Whereas the earned portion means that all people are now of the mindset that I have to accumulate money. I don't mind starting off in that drabby little apartment and buying a used car because I only have $5,000 in the bank. When I have $30,000 in the bank, then I can think about either a nicer house or a nicer car or both. And that's the thinking. Well, that doesn't spur the economy, and that leads to boom and bust. No, it doesn't. It leads to long-term, boring, unexciting earning of money. And it makes the people of a nation sovereign and taking care of themselves, their family, and the disparaged people in their community. And then the other community does the same thing. And then the other community does the same thing. And pretty soon, what do you have? You have an economy that doesn't need the government to support it because you have responsible people that are paying some taxes to the government so they can function doing trade negotiations, defending our shores or our nation from people who are going to attack it, not running around the globe colonizing and stealing people and claiming that they're refugees and putting them to work for less than livable wages. All right? So you don't do things like that because guess what? And this is the great equalizer. The great equalizer that never existed under any of this system was the fact that the gold bullion was the same everywhere. Okay? Countries in the mercantilistic system, some countries had more gold than others. And so they could pay their army to go out and kick you out or colonize whatever you couldn't colonize. All right? Then we get to the paper currency, and we started doing that during the 1700s, as we just saw. And we're doing that all the way through, and then finally we get to the 1930s and the 1970s, and we're doing away with gold now, and we're inflating, and we can't afford that. So that's why cryptocurrency comes along, because it's like it creates an asset now that works like gold, except it works in the modern day system, and there is no government that has control of it. So that it's basically works like my earned value system. Saving, you have to save money. You have to borrow it that way. You have to have your assets built up before you can loan, because there is no third party middleman that's going to siphon money off of you to get rich so that you can have your comfortable lifestyle. You're going to earn your own comfortable lifestyle, never mind the middleman. All right? So that's why central banking, lending and borrowing in the fiat system needs to come to an end. And I believe it will. I don't know how long it'll take, but I believe it will. And when you're going to raise taxes and screw up the economy, because that's all it does anymore, it doesn't pay the debt anymore, it does not, then you need to move to a cryptocurrency system. All right? So that's all I have for today. I thank you for watching. This has been Scott Montgomery. Have a blessed St. Patrick's Day, and we'll see you in my next video. Thank you very much.